very young, growing up, I once responded like you did to my good morning, which is basically with silence. I was kind of called out immediately and asked the question, is the morning not good for you? I said, no, it's good. He said, why didn't you respond then? I said, it's kind of normal. I don't. And then the question was asked again, why didn't you respond? There's no real reason. It was just habit. And that was an important day and an important lesson learned, where the speaker, and I must speak for myself at this point in time, always looks for the temperature in the room. And we've had a fantastic start, a pretty exhilarating dance performance, and then, of course, some very impactful words spoken by Achal. So I think in regard of that, I'll try this one more time and see if the temperature is really as hot as you would like it to be. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thanks, Achal and SHRM and all of you for inviting me over. The topic, of course, I'm sure is something that each one of us believes in. Who doesn't want to win? Everybody wants to win. The world loves a winner, and that's how we want to think about ourselves. So I'm not so sure I'm uniquely qualified to talk about this today, but what I would like to do is to share some of my experiences, some of my most important beliefs, and some of my questions as well, which continue to kind of be on my mind as I come to work or live life usually. So I guess you have a little bit of an introduction to myself. I'll not kind of talk too much about that, but maybe build on it as we go through this. Let's just have the presentation on if we can. Do we have that video on, or the presentation on, please? Okay, great. Right. So let me go straight into this. And like I said, I'll kind of talk through both my experiences as well as a little bit of what I think are beliefs that I've kind of grown up with. And I'll start with this one first. So we talk about changing world. I'm sure all of you have attended enough conferences and read enough books that talk about the VUCA world and stuff like that. So that's kind of passé. That's all known. So the world's been changing ever since it's been around. It's been changing. But what's interesting at this point in time is the dynamism of this change. I've just put together some recently published facts. And if you see, I'm just using, again, social media as a relevant, perhaps, marker here. Google, Facebook, email, traffic. In a year's time, the rate of growth is about 30 to 40%. That is what makes life different today. It's the pace, the acceleration, the rate at which change is happening, which is clearly the reason why winning today becomes that much more difficult, or maybe something that we also need to keep pace with to be on top. So, while I say that, I also believe that some things remain constant. Some things don't change. And this is, again, where my personal belief comes in very strong. And I think values, fundamentally, who we are, how we kind of think of life, and how we build organizations, typically, remain quite steady. And they are the bedrock on which everything else is subsequently built. So it's important to lay a strong foundation. That's how I think life has been for all of us. And again, for myself, this was no different. Growing up in a reasonable middle-income household, my mother was a very big influence in all that I've learned. And the way my learning happened at home was not through any formal education or anything like that. It was more through, idioms and axioms. I'm sure all of us are familiar. In India, a lot of wisdom gets transplanted, gets kind of shared by muhavras and lakoktis and all of those things that we know. So some that I grew up with, I'm going to put up here. I don't know how many of you can read or understand Punjabi, but I'm sure many of you would. One of them, Ra pya janiye ja va pya janiye. Anybody understands this? Raise your hands. Okay. Basically, this is about getting to know someone only when you work or travel with them. It's essentially about the journey of life. That actual interaction and experience tells character. And to me, that's very important. Another definition of character that I read somewhere was character is who you are when nobody's watching. I was very young. I was very impressionable at that point in time, and those words stuck in my head. That is so profound. Character is who you are when nobody's watching. And I think that's the most important thing that we need to build, character, as individuals and in the organizations that we work in. It's really defining about what we will do when there are no rules, when there is no regulation, when there is nothing else guiding us but sheer conscience, thoughtfulness, mindfulness about what's right. And that's important. The other one is really very simple, jistan lage sotan jane, which is basically about empathy. It's about putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Often said to be difficult, but clearly to my mind, if you can't empathize with people you work with, people you live with, organizations that you build, society in large, I think it's not sustainable. And that's where empathy becomes a second strong pillar or foundation, at least as I've lived my life. The third, I'm sure all of you have heard this somewhere or the other. Kal kare so aaj kare so abhi, pal mein pralay ho jayega, phir karega kabhi. Nothing else except a bias for action. It's great to know all the good stuff, but it only comes to fruit if you work, if you put it to work. And those three principles, character, empathy, and in some ways, bias for action, have defined all that I've done in my life, both personally as well as professionally. Those are my belief systems. Those are the things that I've grown up with. And I'll show you how. So again, if I look at what we've done as a company, just to give you a very quick context of who we are, we started Journey 17 years ago as Max New York Life. This was a time when life insurance in India invited private enterprise for the first time. As you know, we had LIC, Life Insurance Corporation, as a monopoly provider of those services for many years, almost 50-odd years by themselves. And thereafter, we were all brought in with joint venture partnerships with some of the foreign names and so on and so forth. And when we started off as Max New York Life, we were uniquely positioned because we did not have any presence in BFSI. Unlike some of the other players who competed for licenses and got them, they were either banks or they were large consumer brands. Even today, if you look around, there are 24 players in the market. And you would pretty much think the who's who of India's corporate world actually represents insurance. I could go straight from the top. If I look at some of the leaders, it's ICICI Prudential, led by ICICI Bank. It's HDFC Life by HDFC, SBI Life, again, SBI as a bank, largest bank, ourselves. We have Birla Sun Life, Tata IIA, you name it, you have it. I mean, if you just draw a line on the top 20-odd corporate houses, you'll find all of them represented. So the competition was immense, and we had to establish ourselves in the face of this competition. To be the fourth largest private insurer, and actually as a standalone insurer, which is not owned by a bank, we are the largest non-bank owned private life insurer, and we've been in that position for the last 6 years now consecutively. That's taken some doing. Just to give you a sense of our size, we do roughly about $1.5 billion, about 11,000 crores in revenue, about $100 million in profit, and we are valued roughly at about $4.5 billion. So that's what we have achieved in the last 17 years, starting from scratch, absolute scratch. Well, some of the other things, the biggest issue in life insurance is trust, because you're fundamentally trying to kind of, help people part with their money, small savings for a long period of time, in the belief that this money will be returned to them in case something were to happen to them, or accumulated over 20, 30 years and returned with some money increase in it. So this was a big issue because when you are an absolute startup, there is obviously very difficult conversations about why should customers trust you? Why should you be the person that they kind of give your money to? And that's really where we've actually had a long journey from being the question of who Max Life or who Max New York Life, today being recognized as one of the super brands consecutively for the last few years. Again, quality of service, that is the premise on which we founded the company. Our vision was to be India's most admired life insurance company. We didn't kind of choose to be the largest or the most profitable or the biggest or any of that stuff. We very deliberately decided to be the most admired life insurance company. And in that word, admiration, we actually encompassed all the stakeholders that we wanted to work with. We wanted to make sure we were a great place to work for our employees. We wanted to make sure we had great service for our customers. We wanted to be sure that we want to be good to work with for partners. And of course, be responsible for society at large. So in that word admiration came in a whole lot of other sub-themes that we thought we were going to go after. And it's kind of something that we continue to be inspired by even today, that remains our vision, that remains our guiding light for what we do every day. I think just to kind of, again, say that a lot has been achieved. The most important thing that I feel proud about is that we have truly been recognized as an industry leader on our HR practices. We have been in the India's Great Places to Work for last 5 consecutive years. We were amongst the top 50 last year, and we were the leading insurance brand in that survey. As you all know, about 800 odd companies participate in that. And it's certainly something that gives us recognition for a lot of good work that's been happening over the past many, many years that leads us to the steady performance. We also are Gallup India's benchmark company in financial services for engagement, employee engagement. And again, we've made steady progress right throughout this journey on every other format that we've looked at, whether it's Kenexa scores or Gallup or Great Places to Work, any survey that can give us inputs of what goes well and what needs to improve. We've been kind of learning from it, and clearly that's one of the biggest hallmarks of what I think we've built as a great performance culture, which is both caring and collaborative, and yet in some ways remains always eager to do more. To me, that's the definition of the company that we are, and that's something that gives me great pride as I talk to you today. How has this happened? Not been smooth. We've actually been through 3 transformations in the last 17 years. Sounds like a lot to say, but that's exactly what we've done. Maybe quite similar to a cocoon becoming a butterfly. And when we started off, there was all the euphoria of a startup. There was all the tailwinds of a growing economy in the 2000s. The insurance sector was considered a sunrise. So a lot of good things happened. In the first 7 years, our CAGR growth rate was roughly 70% per annum. 70% per annum. And we're talking of something which obviously became pretty large, as I shared with you earlier. So clearly, we did a lot of good, exciting new things. But that was one part of it, which was building an institution, building an organization grounds up, getting talent to come in, establishing practices that harness that talent, retain that talent, ensure that we got the best out of that talent. And that's how we built ourselves for the first 7 odd years. And then came the crisis, so to say. The crisis, some bit external, which was led by the global financial crisis to begin with, had its impact on the Indian markets as well. Insurance all of a sudden became a bad word, and lots of customers had remorse with the kind of contracts we had, the policies that we had sold. And this was true for the whole industry, and we were not spared either. So we had to take some dramatic, tough decisions, some of which were as dramatic as cutting ourselves to half our size. We had reached a scale of about 600 odd offices. We shrunk ourselves to 200 offices in the space of 6 months. We had about 13,000 employees, forced us to come down to about 7,500 employees in a period of a year. Now, these are just some markers. A lot else happened, but I'm only sharing with you why it was not just about size and resize, but it was fundamentally about changing mindset. It was changing a mindset which was growth-oriented, which was only about scale and expansion, to then kind of going back to roots and foundations and asking yourselves, who do you serve? And why should that customer buy from you and stay with you? So the focus from expansion and distributor centricity, if I may say, to customer centricity is the pivot that we had to kind of go through. And that changed a lot of things about what we sold, how we even engaged, how we brought in talent, what was the measures of performance that we looked at, how we reward performance, what would pass and what would not pass. All of that became part and parcel of the rethink that we had to do over the last 7 years as we went through the tough adolescence, as we call it. Now, just to give you a context of this transformation, the industry in this period from 2010 to 2015 has a CAGR growth rate of 2%. In contrast, Max Life has grown by 12% in the same period. So that is the extent of change and at the same time the extent of winning that we could establish basis some of the strengths and the foundations that we had laid and the changes that we made. As we look at from here on, we're clearly reaching another stage, another cycle, where a lot of that harsh winter seems to be behind us as an industry. We are back on growth. We are seeing good numbers come through. While the economy is still taking some time to kind of turn around, the optimism continues to be high. So we continue to see some support for financial savings. Reforms like demonetization, or more importantly, the GST, is increasing the formal economy. So there's clearly more formal savings, formal money in the system, hence the need for formal products, financial products like insurance, and hence we continue to see a positive cycle from here on. So this is another stage of life. In this interim, we've also had some first-time things like change of partners. We had Max New York Life as the beginning, so-called name and brand. New York Life was our foreign JV partner who decided to kind of shrink their international operations, and we changed ourselves away from them, brought in a Japanese partner, but now we are Max Life, and that journey we undertook in 2012. There was a lot of anxiety around then as well. What would it mean? It was the first time that something like this was happening in the industry. And yet, it goes back to asking yourself the fundamental questions, making sure that you kind of build on your strengths. And the strength we had was the culture of the company, the deep thinking that we had done, the processes that we had established. And therefore, while partners changed or brands changed, it didn't impact us as much, or in fact, only positively, as we would have wanted to. So those were some of the things that we did. And again, I've shared some of this, but let me quickly kind of talk about this a little bit more in detail. One of the first things that we've done in the organization, and this has been quite deliberate, this is part of the change that we have kind of done over the last many years, is moved away from the very hierarchical, silo-based functional organization that we were running with. While if you see our org chart, it will still look functional, but the way we run the organization now is a lot more horizontal. I'm sure this is something that many of us talk about, but we actually in 2010 inspected this very deeply as to how was delivery to customer happening. And in any organization, in any business, I'm sure this is true, that there is a cross-section of people touching the customer, right from the person who acquires, to the person who then onboards, to the person who subsequently services, and so on and so forth. And ours is a long-tail product. Our products are typically 20 years, 25, 30 years in their tenure. So once a customer comes to us, he remains a customer for a very long period of time. And hence, there are multiple touch points and multiple people involved. So we realized that working in the typical functional organization structure wasn't really necessarily going to present the best outcomes for our customer. So we moved away from that, or rather we kind of created more emphasis on what we call our councils. And councils are nothing more but cross-functional teams that are created that attack any particular challenge or situation that we're trying to kind of really impact. In our case, we have a customer council, we have an employee council, or we have councils that go after specific issues within the business. And these are, again, the best ways that we found that we could harness the energies of various teams, give them a common purpose, and that's most important, a common purpose, and then unleash all of their intelligence and their effort to making sure that the outcomes are then superior. We also changed performance management systems. One of the changes one had to do was to bind everybody, starting from my direct reports, what we call the management team. We created a 25% common goal sheet, so that it wasn't just my desire to kind of conclude all the measures of success that we had, but it was something that I could share the burden with my team, and they in turn could deploy parts of that to their direct reports and so on and so forth. So everybody from top to bottom, if you see our performance management system, you will find they all roll up to the same outcomes that we're trying to kind of hit. And those are important because, to my mind, that's really how you build alignment. You build a certain concerted action towards the goals that you have, and you obviously then get the winning performance that you need. The other that we again realized, and this is part of the lessons learned, is nothing is constant, and context is the king. Content follows. What works in one situation doesn't work in another. What worked for us in the first 10 years didn't work for us in the next. And therefore, we had to constantly evolve. This goes back to, I think, what was said by Achal earlier. In today's day and age, you need to be agile. You need to know your strengths. You certainly need to kind of work and build on them. But at the same time, you need to be willing to question. You need to ask, is it relevant today? You know, I had another very interesting take on your theme for the conference, WIN. W-I-N. And it's a question I often ask internally in my company. What's important now? What's important now? WIN. If you ask that question, you'll realize there are a lot of things that we collect over years, which perhaps are not doing the job. This is like deadwood, baggage that we all live with. And if you ask that question forcefully enough and repeatedly enough, and make it a habit in the organization to keep refreshing, to keep changing, to keep asking the relevant priority question, you will find progress happening. You will find change a lot more easier to assimilate in the organization. It's never easy, but I think these are just some ways, some mindsets that we need to address and obviously kind of move on from there. These are some principles, again, that we followed in the organization. These are personally things that are very close to my heart as well. Purpose backwards. This is something that ad nauseum I kind of ask everybody, including when we hire someone, apart from asking them why they want to join us. In induction, we make sure that when we train people, we spend inordinate time describing to them not just the processes that we run with, the rules and the policies that we have, but fundamentally, why do we have that? We engage in conversations around this. To me, this is the most important thing. There are just too many people in many organizations who continue to come and do work, and we ask them, why do you do this? The answer is, my boss said so, it's always been like that, that's how it happens here. Those are the kind of answers. Do you kind of hear those yourselves when you ask those questions? Yeah, sure. Now, that's not a good enough answer. To my mind, you will get the best effort and the best outcomes out of people when they genuinely burn with that cause, when they internalize it, when they feel it. The passion comes out when they know why they're doing something, whether it's the vision of the company or subsequently the process that they're kind of engaged in. If they don't understand why we do it that way, chances are they'll only do, I think, a part of it. And then they'll get bored, they'll kind of try and make shortcuts and all of that stuff. So this to us is the most important thing. Alignment to vision, alignment to purpose, and working this question why. And actually, in one sense, the most important thing that I again found is that this is not something that people, particularly in our culture, come prepared with. We seem to believe that we have to be subservient. But if you really look back, if you really go into our own ancient history, I certainly am a fan of that. If you look at our Vedas, if you look at all that's been passed down over generations, the fundamental spirit of India is one of question. There are questions and answers have to be discovered. The reason, again, as a distraction, maybe I would say this, Hinduism has survived over those many years is because it is flexible. It allows flexibility to happen. And the basic theme is question and find your answer. And that's really how organizations ought to be too. We've got to promote this ability to ask questions. It's cultural almost, I'd say. And that's something that all of you as leaders of HR, your business partners, your business leaders, all have to kind of actually very clearly and unambiguously promote this within the company. Make sure that you encourage the questioning spirit. Do the right thing. This is one of my other phrases that I use almost every day. I think we all are smart, we're all intelligent, we all have a conscience to keep. And answers to any problem come very clear if you ask yourself in your own conscience, is it okay with you or not? If your conscience says yes, go ahead and do it. And the only other thing I kind of add to that is don't just think about yourself, but when you're kind of processing that question, think about all your stakeholders. Think about, is it right by the customer? Is it right by your employee and colleague? Is it right for the shareholder? Is it right for the regulator? Is it right for the society? If the answers to most of those or all of those are yes, I think you're on the right path. You don't need supervision, you don't need rules, you don't need anything else to kind of guide you in that. This is another piece I think that we need to reiterate, and we do that quite often in our company. Inspect what you expect. This is again really about being present. It's about being engaged. It's about being passionate. Too many things just pass by. Signatures after signatures happen on any approval and anything that happens where nobody has questioned the guy who signed off and said, why did you do this? How did you come to that decision? What pros and cons of this particular choice that you kind of present? And like that engagement, that inspection, again, I think all of us would have remembered, some shops had this very interesting slogan, in God we trust, rest all cash. I think I would like to change that to say, in God we trust, rest all we inspect, and with data. And that's pretty much my next point, which is the hard things in life are difficult to measure, but they are sometimes the most important ones. In our own company, while we were very passionate about customer centricity, there was no way of measuring that. Yeah, we have NPS scores and some surveys done, but that's not enough. We have actually come up with something called a customer experience index. And we've kind of generated this quite by ourselves, looking at various input elements and saying, what do customers really care about? So they care about how they're treated at the point of onboarding, but the most they care about is claim settlement. So we've actually gone ahead and done various things, including industry first, like promising within a 10-day payment of your claims. We're now working to make that one-day settlement of claims. Now, this is fairly complex a subject. There are all kind of other legal processes involved. But net, it's again a desire, it's an ambition. It's kind of recognizing that this is important to my client. So why don't I do this? Why don't I measure it? Regulations might give me 30 days to settle, but that's not good enough. If there's a bereavement in the family, who wants to wait 30 days to get money? Families get ruined in that time. So it's again about doing some things which are not routine. And my invitation to all of you would be to ask that question of yourselves, what are you doing in your business that's most pertinent to your business? Remember context. Context is king. And at the same time, it's a hard thing to do, but you think if you were to kind of measure that and make that visible, change would happen. Improvement would happen. That is a question we must engage with. I guess the last one is truly a spirit where how we run, how we've kind of built Mac's life. And it's about being the best. It's about raising the bar on ourselves. Even when we are the number one in the industry on any of these parameters that I just mentioned to you, it doesn't stop us. It just makes us even more desirous of trying to say, next year, even if it is a few basis points more, let's go for it. Let's try it. Let's try and improve everything that we do in any which way that we can. So I think these, to my mind, are these principles that have helped us a lot, that have allowed us to kind of prosper as a company and made us who we are. Taking a little bit of your so-called, role into view, as a CEO, one of my beliefs is that the CFO and the CHRO are the two arms with which a CEO functions. You are actually pretty much, and I won't get into the debate of which one is left and which one's right. That's not meaningful. What's meaningful is you can't operate successfully if you don't have two strong arms. And I think too much is done and said about the CFO, and I do believe what Achal said, the time has come for the CHRO to exert themselves equally strongly. You guys, to my mind, are the custodians of culture. You're the custodians of performance. You're the custodians of everything that has to happen in an organization to make it deliver the goals or the objectives that we set for ourselves. Because you truly are, in some ways, omnipresent. We're dealing with people. Finally, we're not machines. And people have a way in which they operate. And that ability to connect the organization's dots with every individual, right at the bottom to the top, is what I think HR can do and should do. So I have a huge belief in the principles of human resources management. And I can only say this, that a large part of our success, who we are and how we've come here, is due to the fact that we had a very strong partnership at all points of time between business leaders and human resources teams, which have together driven the agenda, together driven that alignment, together driven those principles that I just spoke to you about, to actually ensure that everybody in the organization is connected, clear, and obviously recognized for what they do. So what do I see? I think areas that I would like us to maybe talk a little bit more about as conference progresses, and equally for you guys to mull with your teams going back. The biggest issue is talent. And this is something I'm going to come back to in a different format shortly, but very quickly I'll say the challenge that all companies face today, including us, is how do you spot talent, how do you kind of bring it in, how do you make sure you develop it, and how do you ensure that you retain it, engage it quite meaningfully over the years. I think service industries particularly are notorious for the rate of attrition that we all run, and that's something that I continue to worry about, because at that kind of rate of attrition, A, there's a huge waste cost. B, I think it's just something that will not allow institutions to be built out of India, which are truly world-class. We need to fix it. We need to find a way of doing that. And I find some of the processes through which we even hire today, and I mean no offense to anyone sitting in the room, but I find pretty much the same old way of interviews and some tests and some stuff like that we've been trying to do for many years to spot talent. In my limited experience, I think those things don't work. It's just not giving me evidence enough to say that we as organizations and you as HR leaders have really fixed this issue of how to spot talent, how to bring it in, and how to kind of curate it. The other one, I guess, where again I was speaking at length right now, is make an organization that's fit for purpose. We all seem to be quite bound by some overall designs of how organizations are, standard practices. We must have a CFO, must have a CHRO, must have a marketing head, must have a distribution head, blah, 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 blah. Very rarely do I find courage and conversations in companies which says, what's the focus of the organization? What are we really trying to do or deliver? What's special about us? And if this is what's special about us, this is how we should structure ourselves. That conversation I find quite missing. And again, I would speak for ourselves. I've had to push that agenda quite hard because most people are comfortable knowing, that they have this designation, that role, whatever. But the minute you change that around, you make it more, aligned to what goals you're trying to set, there are all kind of questions in people's mind. How is this job, rated? How is it going to be rewarded? Does it mean that I'm being demoted or promoted? God knows what else. We've got to change this conversation, and I think HR leaders have a big role to play in that. You've got to start from the purpose backwards, as I said. What's the purpose of the organization? What are you trying to deliver this year, next year, 3 years from here? And then tell me if your org structure talks to that, if your org processes talk to that. That is what I mean by fit for purpose. Chief Happiness Officer. This is what I would think the CHRO should be. Change your human resources epithet to happiness. Can we generate happiness? Can we create happiness? Can we ensure everybody in the organization is happy doing what they're doing? Another way of saying engagement, perhaps. But to me, happiness is a lot more human. It's a lot more, what you and I will relate to as people. We find, I think sometimes we get too seriously bogged down by either structures or hierarchy or just this thought that we want a happy organization is not emphasized enough. Fun at work seems to be somebody else's problem. Oh, some kids will do it. They'll organize some party. They'll do some, weird stuff, and that's happiness. No, it's not. It's a state of mind. It's a state of being. It's about how excited are you coming to work every morning, and how happy are you going back every evening, such that you create happiness at your home environment as well. Are we creating a day full of happiness? Are we creating years full of happiness? And therefore, looking back, do people say, wow, what a great experience I had with that company? To me, that ought to occupy us as HR leaders as a question. What am I doing to create happiness in my organization, in my team, in my sphere of influence every single day? Bit by bit, I think we can get there. The last, I think, is again, a constant challenge where I believe organizations and people, leaders today have to be multifocal. They have to be at least bifocal. There's always something which is burning, which is pressure for today, for right now, and then there is always the long term. And there is too often a conflict between these two. My request and recommendation to all of you is to start embracing, and again, I was fortunate enough to hear someone talk about this, who said, one definition of maturity is your ability to handle or hold multiple versions of truth simultaneously in your mind, believing that all of them are right. Now, this is a long one, let me repeat that. Maturity is your ability to hold multiple versions of truth at the same time in your head and believing that all of them are right. So what I take away from that is that, this whole question about I know best or I know all has to be some bit focused or rechanged to kind of saying that you have a perspective, I have a perspective, let's find common grounds and move on from there. And as we do that, we will not just transact at the surface, but again, align quite deeply at the core of what are we trying to do and how. And therefore, this multifocal lens of short-term, long-term, thinking hard and deep on most issues becomes a very pertinent attribute, a very pertinent requirement of the HR role. Well, with that, I pretty much want to leave you with two questions that are burning on my mind. And I just thought this was a very influential community of people that I'm talking to. So let me take this opportunity to kind of say, what are we doing about this? This is not pertinent perhaps to me as an individual alone. It's not just about my organization. It's not about your organization either. But it's about the society we live in, the kind of company we build, and importantly, I think, the country that we're all passionate about. So, two themes. First, we seem to have this problem of jobs. We seem to have an amazing situation where I just spoke about talent being scarce. We all struggle with talent. I'm sure that would be your number one agenda item. If I were to ask any of you in your HR role, what's your problem? You would certainly quote talent as one. And at the same time, we have joblessness in this country. We have thousands and lakhs of people who are kind of unemployed and actually unemployable. So we've seen the numbers. I'm sure the government's been kind of giving us some data as well. But 2.5 lakh jobs created out of 20 lakh odd graduates that we have every year come through. Wow, only 10%. What are the 90% going to do? Where are they going to go? We could export a few, sure, but not everybody. So we have a massive problem building up. And this problem shows itself in crime. It shows in I would say, a general issue that we are dealing with as society, aggression. I think part of the dance troupe also kind of was describing that in their own beautiful way. But I'm asking us as HR leaders, what's our take on this? What are we going to do about it? pass it off as somebody else's problem? Or can we change things here? How much of your own emphasis is on value addition to your teams when you bring in? How much do you look for raw talent to come in, and you've created a factory inside where you'll be able to process that talent into a skilled individual, into talent as we call it? I know that each time budgets get cut, the first budget to get cut is the training budget. The next one is, of course, the brand budget. You know, those are commonplace things we all live with. No, please don't. Stand up for it. As leaders, that's your role, that's your responsibility. That may again be one of those short-term, long-term conflicts. You could get by today, but you'd certainly not have an institution. And I think this is something that I leave with you as a bigger question for us to solve. How many of us are actively using our CSR budgets? How many of you are actively using your employee bases? I'm sure collectively you have influence over thousands, if not lakhs of employees. How are we engaging them to make them better? Skill them truly. And the other is my all-time favorite. I just don't understand why we brought the caste system into our companies. Provocative, I know, but I wish to take this opportunity to say so. That India had a history of casteism, fine, that's history. But within our own companies, why do we have such rigid hierarchies? You know, each time we had a problem of attrition, particularly amongst our frontline salespeople, one of the solutions that came from my HR team to me was, let's change the title. Have you all played the title game? Yeah, you have. See, laughter tells me that. ये manager को deputy manager को senior deputy manager, God knows what. I mean, it's mind-blowing. And then the other thing we allow is that senior people can misbehave. I'm sorry, how come? As custodians of culture, it's my invitation to you. Please stand tall on any transgression that happens on values. And the fundamental value, to my mind, first of all, is humanity. Is respect for each other. I don't believe just because somebody sits in another chair, it gives him or her the right to speak differently to anybody else. This is not a place, organizations are not where tantrums should be thrown. If you have an anger management problem, yeah, let's send you to a course. You go to the forests, do whatever else. Organization is not the place where you show it. This whole exalted idea of the CEO, I think we need to invert it. And I've actually, since inception of this company, been drawing diagrams for all my employees and agents and customers to say that it's an inverted organization. Customers right on top, then comes my frontline person, then comes everybody else, and I'm the last guy in this pyramid. And I'm here only to serve. That's all I do. Because by myself, I do nothing else. It's important that you as leaders bring this ethos to life. Sometimes people might want to do this, but don't know if it is permissible. Don't know. Most of the companies that I work with, deal with, have friends in, tell me this, that they want to do the right thing, but somehow they're inhibited. I think HR has a role to play there. You have to free the organization of all these inhibitions. You have to free the organization of all these, bondages and bandages that we have, which tell people that they can't do what is right, that they can't express themselves. That, to me, is my view of what truly a liberated organization ought to be, a performing organization ought to be. Thank you very much for your patient listening. It's been a delight for me to present my thoughts. Thanks a lot.